Hello and good afternoon, everyone. We shall begin in 2 or 3 minutes. Till then, stay connected. Thank you. Hello and very warm afternoon to everyone present over here. I, Nital Kataria, on behalf of Team Project Bhagwati, welcome you all. And let me first quickly introduce that what is Project Bhagwati. Project Bhagwati indeed is a community of 17 people, including 7 volunteers and 10 students, in which volunteers have been providing the coaching for IIT JAM. It's free of cost and even without expecting a single thing in return. Uh, and again, we are immensely pleased that we are again in front of you with this fourth public talk of Project Bhagwati. And I would really like to thank Mr. Neil Vadodaria for accepting our invitation and taking the responsibility to uh, to be a speaker of this talk. And a very special thanks to each and everyone present over here for gracing this auspicious occasion. Let me first introduce Mr. Neil Vadodaria, a guy, astounding guy, who has who is the first to translate the official poster of LEGO in Gujarati, and who is also who has done his BSc from St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad, and currently he is a second-year student in MSc and has been obtaining his degree from IIT Patna. Also, he is amongst the top 1% state level and national level NGPE students. Also, he has 1 year of research experience at Institute for Plasma Research, Gandhinagar, and currently he is active in the research in the field of observational astronomy at uh, uh, Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad, along with Mr. Vishal Joshi, sir, since past 2.5 years. Um, Now I would like to hand over this responsibility to Nisarg Bhai to introduce us more about Neil Bhai, and then Neil Bhai will be leading us to the exciting tour to the astronomical world in a few moments. Yes, Nisarg Bhai, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mithal, for this wonderful introduction of Neil and wonderful introduction of our team, entire our community. I would again like to thank each one of you who are present here on time. I would like to thank you very much for marking your presence here. And this is going to be a wonderful ride. I am so sure about this because I know Neil. So Neil has been a very good friend since a long time. Actually, our friendship actually grew in the times of quizzes, when we participated in quizzes, and I still remember that time when any global political question or global geographical question or anything comes up, like our team looks at Neil, and Neil is the first one to provide those answers anytime. So our friendship grew even stronger in those times. I had so many doubts in gravitational waves, basic physics. I was going to give a talk, and even many of my professors don't know about the topic. So whom to consult? I was in very much dilemma at that time. I want to give a talk next week, and I don't actually know about the subject. Whom to consult? Yes, and Neil comes into my mind, and immediately I go to Neil. Yes, Neil, you tell me about gravitational waves, how they are affecting our Earth, how are we able to measure it using LIGO India or LIGO Observatory. So I talked with him. He gave me so simple yet elegant explanation of everything that my entire understanding about gravitational waves developed from that point. I'm still learning about it, but the basic understanding or basic interest in the field came from that part. So I really thank you for that, Neil. And I remember Neil's grandfather was a freedom fighter. So whenever I got a chance to visit his house now, his grandfather was a freedom fighter who struggled in the freedom battle of India. And Neil is just the same. I could see that whenever we were in our college, Neil, whenever he feels that something is not accurate, something should have been done, the professors are not teaching really well, every time in the feedback, he is the one who is raising the voices. Every time when something wrong is going on, he is the one to raise his voices. So I still see a freedom fighter in you, Neil, all the time. So I am immensely inspired whenever you are around. So it is our great pleasure, and I would like to take this opportunity to actually tell everybody that in the formative period of Project Bhagwati, when we were just starting, Neil was one of our strategic advisor. So he used to advise whatever doubts I had about how it should go, how it should not go. I shared all with him, and he gave so many wonderful inputs on this. He gave his time in initial time. So actually, Neil, you should have been the first speaker, not the fourth one. So with this question, I'm resting my case that what took you so long? Why are you fourth? You should have been the first speaker. So please take us to the journey of astronomy. Everybody is fascinated about astronomy, but we are actually more fascinated that how you astrophysicists do your work day by day, every day. So please take us into the journey, and please answer this question: what took you so long? Why fourth speaker, not the first one? Yes, thank you.
So first of all, I am extremely humbled by the generous introduction that Nisarg has given us. Yes, we have had very great time when we were in St. Xavier's. And to answer your question, what took me so long? Well, because I wanted to do it the way I could deliver the best, given the commitment with college and all. I would have wanted it to be in a certain way so as to make sure that the delivery is what I want. Or if some people are coming to me, they should be satisfied with what they've seen or what they would like to experience. So today's talk is going to be a little different in the sense that I'm not going to give a lecture or a speech. It's going to be extremely bi-directional, as you will see in a while. We will be talking a lot. I would be even giving you live polls. And the best part is there are no right answers to these polls. Whatever you are telling me, whatever be you speaking, all the answers are correct. So what I want is maximum participation from you guys, that you ask me much questions, and I would be just introducing the field of astrophysics and how actually we do it on everyday basis. But to be able to discover, actually you will have to ask me the questions at the end, and it would evolve into understanding. Because just when I was a student, I used to go to people and ask, hey, what's happening? How are you doing this? What will you be doing? And that's how I learned the field. I asked questions to students that what's your daily routine like? I would ask questions to professors that why are you doing this? Why do you enjoy doing this? So that's how it would be. I would be asking you questions. You are supposed to guess those answers. Later on, I would be providing somewhat insights about what I feel for them. And then finally, we'll be talking about, in general, whatever doubts you have. So I hope my screen is visible. And you would be seeing 4 different images. All of them are actually from stock Google images. The first 4 images you would get if you type the key in the word astronomer and go for an image search. So now what I would want you all to do is tell me which among these 4 images do you see to represent a professional astronomer the best. Like if I had only to give someone an image and tell them this is what a professional astronomer does or a professional astrophysicist does, which image would you recommend to someone? So what you can do here is there is this link polev.com/neelvadadaria581. You can go there and actually give me your responses by clicking on the options A, B, C, or D, or E, if you feel that none of them actually describe the life of an astronomer. So I would request someone to just share this link again in the chat so it is easily available for our participants. And please keep this tab open. We will be using it a lot during this talk. So I guess I will give you guys around 30 seconds to 1 minute to answer. And I can already see I have 8 results, 9 results. I will wait till it gets to 10 or 12. Okay, I have 11 results now. So let's see what the results are. Oh, so as you will be doing this, the results would be updating live. So I see that 50% of you believe that the image D, or even 54% of you believe that the image D is very accurate representation of what a professional astronomer does. Now let us talk about each of these images. Like if you see the 4 images, you would first find that the sophistication of telescope is increasing gradually. The first one is using a home telescope or something which you would use in a school or a science lab. The option B has some somewhat larger telescope. Option C, the person is using a telescope which would be generally used by someone who is in amateur astronomy or is running a science center. And option D looks like a permanent observatory. And so most of you have gone to option D based on what a professional physicist or an astronomer does. Well, to be honest, there are no correct answers to this. But if you just look at these images, you will find that 2 of them are men and two of them are women. However, unfortunately, we have very less amount of women in this field, which is something which everyone would like to increase future. So if there are young women out there, know that the number of astronomers and astrophysicists who are women are increasing day by day, and they are making immense contribution to the field. So we would soon like to have an equal representation. Now coming to the question as to which of the image actually tells us who an astronomer is, then you will be surprised to find that the time you spend with telescope does not actually matter much, or is not something an astrophysicist does daily. It generally consists about 5% or 10% of their daily routine. Or if you look at how much time they spent in an year, you would find that it was only 10% of the time at maximum when they were with a telescope or at an observatory. So to say that which of the 4 describes, all 4 of them have some issues. So none of the above could also have been a good option. Now we'll explore why. Well, you all must have already seen the Big Bang Theory series. It talks about 4 physicists at Caltech. The first, and from that an Indian guy named Rajesh Kuthrapalli is described to be an actual astrophysicist. And this is the scene in his lab. So he looks more like a computer manager or someone who is working in a CCTV room or a train footage, because he has the lots of data to deal with. So he's actually using 5 screens at a time. In one of them, if you look carefully, in the lower panel, you would see that he's looking at some of the images. He has done some analysis and looking at graphs otherwhere. And some of the tabs is just coding physics. So does that mean that an astrophysicist is actually a person who actually spends most of the time in front of his computer? Well, the answer to be is yes. We will discover it in more detail. So suddenly you might feel that, okay, so this doesn't look like that interesting a field it was before. Well, I would just like to break the image. So these are some of the students who are doing PhD, some who have done PhD in physics and astrophysics in general. And these are what the views are once they enter the field together. Well, whenever we talk or see an astronomer in a TV, it's a very glorified field where generally the talk is about, let us find where the origins of our universe are, or like saying that we are all made up of star stuff, or let's say that we are just trying to live on a pale blue dot. Well, all of this is correct, but it is not an experience or a realization that an astrophysicist have on everyday life. More generally, an astronomer would be more looking at buggy Python codes and would be full of frustration. Why my code is not running? Where is my data? Why is my telescope not pointing where it is? So the motive behind was to break this rosy picture that it is not all grandeur and deep shit, but it also has a lot of very fundamental work to be done. So let us begin with the history of astronomy. And you might be wondering that you might have heard astronomy, astrophysics, as well as some people talking about cosmology. So how does these three fields differ from each other? So let me tell you that the astronomy is the oldest science. To talk about it being oldest means that even when we were not Homo sapiens or fully developed as humans, every night people would sit, look up at the stars, try to wonder what they are, how they are moving. At times they would find something peculiar about the sky and would keep walking at them, wondering what it may be. And slowly they've found out that maybe there is some periodic repetition in these patterns as they appear in sky. They used it to create our first time systems to say when it would be day and night. Based on the location of constellations, they could predict what season it would be or what season would be coming next. So slowly they began observing the night sky and astronomy was born. So astronomy only pertains to about observing the night sky, taking observations as to when what is happening, and also seeing whether some new event is happening or not. So one of the most path-breaking astronomer would be Tycho Brahe. Now this guy looked at the sky every night for 20 long years. And he was particularly interested as to why there are some blobs which are brighter than others and they do not twinkle. And he used to say that these things do not seem to have any pattern at all. Someday they would appear here, some day they would be moving a little east, the next night they would be a little more towards the east, and suddenly they would take a turn and start moving towards west. So he was very interested in these objects, which we now know as planets. And for 20 years, every night, you would record which planets are visible, which planets are not visible, when did that planet rise from the night sky, when did that planet set in the night sky. And he would do it meticulously so that no one could question the accuracy of his thing. He would maintain volumes of paper. So you must be aware that in 1700s, having paper on your hand was a luxury, which not everyone could afford. So in that era, he used to maintain journals for 20 long years. And you might wonder, what would it be helpful to a person who is in the Middle Ages, where we don't have internet, we don't have electricity? Why would be measuring the sky so important? It was only after Tycho Brahe that one of his friends or a junior, Johannes Kepler, actually took that data and studied it. And he was actually able to conclusively say that look, these planets, they have a very weird motion in the sky because like Earth, they are also revolving around the sun. Now, how wonderful is that? That you are looking at a dome, say a sphere like, or maybe you are in a spherical fishbowl, and just by observing things that are changing on the surface of the fishbowl, you are able to tell that your fishbowl, along with other fishbowls, is orbiting a central point. To be an astronomer was actually even terrifying to be at that time, because they were claiming something that was wrong according to the Gospels of God, according to the Bible, and they had to face many challenges, from being ostracized from the society, being punished for what they had to say, just because it did not obey the general consensus, we can say. So if you look at Tycho Brahe, he was the first person who took meticulous, precise observation and in a very periodic fashion for a very long time. And those data finally made into something meaningful by Kepler. So you can say that Tycho Brahe is a pure astronomer who looked at the night sky, took meticulous observations, and tried to find out what actually is happening in the sky. While Kepler, on the other hand, used the same data and was able to predict or tell why that thing is happening. So if you are answering the question, what is happening in the night sky, you are an astronomer. If you want to explain why that thing is happening, you become an astrophysicist. So one of the example would be the LIGO collaboration, where the people working could be categorized as an astrophysicist because they not only observe the waves that are coming, but they also explain the origins as to why this thing is happening. That is it two black holes that are colliding? Is it a neutron star that is colliding? Or is it some star which is coming to the end of its life and it is causing these waves to be generated? So they also, an astrophysicist also answers the question why along with how or what. Then comes people who would consider themselves to be cosmologists. These could be like Stephen Hawking or Jim Green. They are interested in more pertinent questions. Sometimes they have a fine line between these questions being answered by religion and being answered by people in science. But what differs is the approach. What they want to do is have a definite answer, and by doing so, they want not just to make claims, but to be able to back those claims based on observation, mathematics, or have an building up approach. So these people actually try to explain why there are large galaxies, why there is something rather than nothing. Why did everything emerge as it is? Why is it not something else? Why is the value of gravitational constant the way it is? Why were we born? And questions like that. So they also rely on observational data. They do a lot of math on paper. So their laboratory is actually their own brains and the paper. And combining both of them, they are able to inch us a little forward in our understanding of a universe and why we are here and where we are going next. So this is how the field of an astronomy is different from the field of astrophysics, and how astrophysics is different from cosmology. So well, now it's time for another question. Now that you know what these skills are and what do these professions do, can you tell me which is the most important subject or a skill an astrophysicist should have? So these are generally the subjects you would study in a undergrad physics course, or maybe even as a engineer or somewhere. So I would like your responses on this. You can go to the same link and select. Now what is different here is you could actually rank these things. That you feel that coding is the first, then you can give it a first rank. You can give classical mechanics second rank, and so on and so forth. You can actually drag and drop this data and decide which field is there, which you feel would be the most important for an astrophysicist. So I will wait for 1 minute for all the answers to poll. Okay, so a lot of people are saying coding. Classical mechanics and electromagnetism are almost neck to neck. Electromagnetism is moving up. It's just like a race now. We have 4 different people, and I think so now you have a firm opinion. No, it's still changing as to what is the most important subject or skill. Okay, so I will wait for 5 more seconds, then I will log these options. So yes, some of you have answered coding. Well, as I've said, all of the 4 are important. The degree to which they are important to you would depend upon what subfield or where you are working on, which I would come to know. But something which you all of you have answered correctly is coding and data analysis is always important. It was important in the era of Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler, and is important right now as well. Because until we know what is happening, until we observe what is happening, we cannot actually make any predictions. And our job is to look at what's happening and to record it so that we could analyze it at a later time. And the other 3 we'll be touching upon soon. So first, I have a very personal definition of astrophysics, which I like to call it as physics on steroids. Now, why physics on steroids? You might know that steroids are drugs that mimic human hormones, and they are infamous for actually being a performance enhancement drug in sports or competition, or people take it to look better or have a more muscular body. What they do is they actually make your capabilities seem much larger than they actually are for a temporary time. So astrophysics is just like physics on steroids, because anything that you have learned in physics, anything at all, is actually even useful today in astrophysics. We'll be using each and every skill in physics, but doing it at a scale which is not possible on planet Earth. Say you are talking about temperature, and you would be surprised to know that the temperature of our universe was 10 to the power 32 Kelvin. Or even if I put 10 to the power 32 Celsius, it does not make any difference, much difference, when our universe was first created. So that's like 1 followed by 32 zeros. That's an extremely high temperature. Even tungsten melts at 4000 degrees centigrade. And we are trying to go beyond a place where there could be gas or even plasma state, to currently where the average temperature of universe is just 3 Kelvin. 3 Kelvin is like minus 271 degrees or minus 270 degrees. So from an extremely hot universe, we are now at a place which is extremely cold. It's like traveling from the Gobi Desert or Sahara Desert directly to Antarctica in a few time. That's how massive the scale appears when you talk about an astrophysical sense. Same goes to the mass. If you know our sun has around 10 times the mass of Earth, like 10 to the power 10, and you add 10 more orders to it, that's the mass of the largest black hole ever discovered. So it is essentially governed by the same laws of gravitation that are governed on Earth. So it's just to give a sense of scale. Similarly with the magnetic field, if you know the tokamaks which are built, or if you go for an MRI, they would talk, oh, we have 1.5 Tesla magnetic field, we have 3 Tesla magnetic field. The strongest magnetic field on Earth is 20 Tesla. But when we talk about pulsars or neutron stars, actually the field is 10 to the power 11, 1 followed by 11 zeros to 10 to the power 13 zeros. So that's how wide or broad in terms of scale astrophysics is. So this reminds me of a quote from the movie Newton, where the protagonist is sitting with someone at a cafe, and he asked, do you know why Newton was famous? So he says he discovered law of gravitation. To that he says that no, not because he discovered law of gravitation, but he said that the laws on the heaven and laws on the earth are the same. It's not, the universe sees everyone as equals. It's not like someone are in a privileged position in the eyes of nature and some other set of people are not. Everyone is equal in the law of nature and court of nature. So it also tells us one thing. If we learn more about the outside world, we are learning more about inside world or things on earth which we could use every day. So one of the best example of that would be the age in 1868, August 18th, there was a total solar eclipse. So it was a very good time to study the spectra or the light coming from sun. And it so happened that that solar eclipse was passing through India. So some scientists from United Kingdom in 1868 traveled to India at a place called Guntur and did a spectroscopic survey. They basically put a prism from the light that was coming from the sun during the eclipse and tried to see what kind of light is coming out or what colors of light do I see during an eclipse. And they could see that there are some certain colors that are missing. And this led them to believe that there must be some gas which we have not discovered yet. And that gas turned out to be helium. So helium, if you see, is the second most elementary element. It comes after hydrogen and helium. But it is surprising to know that helium was discovered first outside, then it was discovered in on planet Earth. Now we use helium as a fire extinguisher, or we use it as in balloons because it's not flammable. It is a good alternative to hydrogen. It is also used for cryo techniques. And there are immense applications of helium today here on planet Earth. But that would have been delayed a lot or would not have been possible if we were not looking up in the sky. So that's what makes astrophysics interesting, that it is a very fascinating subject. It is an evolving subject, and it also has a lot of applications on Earth. So now, as we talked about our 4 subjects, so one of the things any astronomer would do, or any astrophysicist will do, would record observation, take data, and use that data to do their analysis. So if you see on the top right corner, you could see small dots. So what are these dots? Well, there is a very typical observation of one star. So what this guy has done is he has observed this star for from 260 to 340 and above. So like for 90 days. And he has recorded how the brightness of the star was changing every minute or every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes he would measure the brightness of the star and try to see if it's changing or not. So you would see that there are some gaps in this data, like there is places where they are blank. They could be because those days there was a lot of clouds, so you could not take data. It could also mean that it was a daytime, so there is a gap. So these are the types of things they want to interpret. He has not taken data on some days, so you see a bigger gap happening, and then you see a fall in the brightness, which is then gradually increasing. So that would make an astronomer wonder, like, why is there a fall in brightness? Is my star being shadowed or eclipsed? Is my star losing its brightness? Is it becoming dim every day? What is actually happening? So these are the types of questions they try to answer based on these observations. And for us, astrophysics has always been pretty pictures. But if you look at actually these pictures, some of them are just artist impression, which are actually real images, are not exactly just like you have taken a picture on your camera and you shared it on Instagram. They are very processed image. In the mean to say that imagine having a bulb placed 100 kilometers away from you and you are trying to take the picture of that bulb. So what do you expect if you use a best DSLR camera that's available to you? You use a zoom lens. Will you be able to get the image of that bulb? The answer would be maybe, but the screen would appear absolutely black. So does that mean that no light from that bulb has come into your camera? Then the answer would be no. There would always be some light, but it would be so small that it wouldn't have been registered properly. Or maybe there is evidence of it, but you cannot actually see it because it's so dim. So what do astronomers do is, same things happen with a telescope. You can think of a modern telescope as a big lens system of a DSLR camera and a camera actually attached at the end of the telescope. So they take this image and they do a lot of data processing. They reduce the noise, they subtract a dark frame to mean that they take a photo when it's completely dark, then they take a photo of sky, then they subtract the photo that was dark, so only the things that had light are now visible. It's like saying that I have 3 rupees, you have 4 rupees. I want to find out how much more money you have. So I subtract 4 minus 3 and tell you that it's 1. So that 1 indicates that there is a point in this picture where there is more light. Then there are many other image processing that is done. You take this light in ultraviolet, infrared, and you are finally able to create an image of a galaxy, where actually you can differentiate that this is a brighter spot or a place which is worth 10 rupees, then a place which is worth 5 rupees, 3 rupees, like as an analogy. Okay, so you get that these pretty pictures are not actually just regular images. Actually, they are also done on a different file format. Like in a regular picture, you would have a matrix X and Y, and there would be numbers telling what color that pixel has. If it's an HD screen, that would be 1024 into 780. And so that would be the number of points on your screen for which you could give a distinct number. But for an astronomical picture, actually there would be more than 3 images. Like there would be an image in IR, there would be image in UV, there would be, so some images would be bright in one way, another would be bright in one way. And when all of these 3 are combined, you actually are able to get an image which is very sharp and beautiful. So that is one more way where you will be using data processing a lot. Also image processing, which is not a skill which only astronomers do. People who make camera do image processing, engineers do image processing, those who do satellite technology do that, those who are in military and want to look at what the enemy is doing, they do it. So it's a skill which is a very wide skill but has immense application in astrophysics. Similarly, if you look at this graph, you would see spectra. Spectra is basically telling which wavelength of light is bright or which wavelength of lights are present. And you would see that there are periodic dips in this spectra. So this is the light coming from a star, to be in a very simple terms, has been passed through a prism, and then we are seeing that which color light is bright, which color light is absent, and trying to make conclusions of that. So it actually tells us what color that star is, what are the, you can say, elements present in that star, and so on. So for all of this, there are various packages in Python, which is the preferred language. And there's a package called AstroPy that is used a lot. So if you want to know how this is done, a good way would be to start with AstroPy. Then if you are doing a regular physics course, classical mechanics, Newton's law is something which we have all come across. So, but it is just the same thing. Say I want to explain the orbit of moon around the earth, or if I want to place a satellite around this system, at what points would it be ideal to place a satellite? You would find that these 5 points, called the Lagrange points, are ideal points to put a satellite around moon or around earth. And so why is that? Because if I put a satellite here, I do not have, it will stay there forever. Like if I put it in this orientation at L4 point, it will always look towards earth and moon. Even if the moon is rotating around the earth, it would rotate at the same way, so that relatively they all appear to be going together. So how do I know these points exist? Well, it's simple mathematics, and the formula is gm1 m2 upon r square, and you equate it to the momenta or the centripetal force, and you can find out these points easily. Another important classical mechanics which you use is virial theorem, which says that your potential energy is twice of the kinetic energy, or vice versa. So it is also true for a star. Say there is a star, it has a gravitational potential energy which tries to bind the star, and there is thermal energy which is being produced because light is being made, fusion is happening, which is trying to pull the star apart. When both of these stars, both of this energy is balanced, we find that it creates a star whose internal processes are trying to rip it off, and at the same time it has some gravity which is trying to pull it together. So a fine balance exists between these two forces that make the star. And this is an equation which describes the same. It is called the Tolman-Oppenheimer equation. So it tells about the change of pressure which happens due to gravity pulling the star inwards, and the fusion, which is pulling the star outwards. And obviously, the Kepler's law were very basic classical mechanics, which you all must have studied sometime in your past, that if you are moving in a circle or you are moving in an ellipse, and for same amount of time, the area enclosed by a particle moving in the orbit would be same. So essentially it tells us that if you are near to that star, you will be moving quickly, and if you are away from that star or from the focus, you would be moving slowly. But the amount of area which you cover from the focus to the circumference would always be the same. So it gives us an idea to predict how fast the body would be moving. Then comes electromagnetism. At times it would appear, why electromagnetism? Then you would realize that it's not just about electric field and magnetic field, but it's also the subject of light. Light itself is an electromagnetic wave. So, and it is the first messenger in astronomy. By first messenger, I mean light is something we can perceive, see. And that's how we know that the stars, the sky, the planets exist. So to be able to study light is extremely important for an astrophysicist, because that's how you design a telescope. That's how you study the light. That's how you know that it is made up of different frequencies. But you might say that, hey, all this is very elementary. So does it have a use in modern parlance? Like, okay, to be able to do a wave equation is very elementary, done in 1800s. Why is electromagnetism important now? So if you know that there are clouds in the sky, some days if it is hot and you are sitting near a bonfire, you could see that as the flames rise, there is a hot air above the bonfire and things look distorted due to the vapor. Or if on a hot day you see a mirage while going in a car and things appear very distorted. Same happens when we view the night sky in a dark day. Everything appears fuzzy, stars appear twinkling due to the atmosphere, and we cannot actually observe a twinkling star because it is changing a lot. So what if we could subtract the twinkling of that star? How would we do that? Well, we would take a laser, throw it in sky, and see what image that laser creates in sky. And as we know the original image of that laser in a room, we could subtract both images and tell how our atmosphere is disturbing the image of our star, and correct for it using data or computation, or even by actually moving the mirrors of the telescope in a fashion that they cancel the disturbances of sky. So this is where knowledge of electromagnetism comes in. Sometimes you look at different spectra, IR, radiation, ultraviolet, X-rays. That's when you're useful. And you might be wondering that I threw a lot of data that the magnetic field could be as high as 10 to the power 11. The electric field could be as high as 10 to the power 10. The mass could be this high. Now, how do I know these things for sure? If you know, if a charge is moving, it also radiates electric field and light. So when there is a very energetic source like this black hole, which is shown on the right, it will generate extremely energetic jets. Now, how energetic these jets are, we can find out by looking at its spectra using a formula in electromagnetism, which tells us what the Doppler shifts are. Or maybe if the electric field is so high, it would show Zeeman effect or Stark effect in the spectra. And we can use that small effects to actually calculate what would have been the field there or situation there. So if you look at this, astrophysics is actually like a detective. You are actually a real world Sherlock Holmes by using very small indicators or very tiny signals, which generally we avoid or like neglect in our daily life. We're actually able to make powerful predictions of what is there out. And one of the very beautiful tool to do it is spectroscopy. If you look at the night sky, some stars appear blue, some appear red, some appear yellow. So, and if you look at your gas stove, if your gas stove is working perfectly fine, then the flame would be dark blue, bluish purple. Then if there is some dust in that or your gas flame is not working proper, it would be reddish, yellowish. So what does it tell? That the blue flame is very hot, or red flame is not so hot, but it's hot as well. there is something called a yellowish flame, which is hotter than the red flame, but colder than a blue flame. Stars are the same. If it's blue, it's quite hot, 30,000 degree Kelvin or 30,000 Kelvin at its surface. If it is whitish, it is 10,000 Kelvin. If it is yellowish like our sun, it would be 6,000 to 4,000 Kelvin. If it is reddish, it is 3,000 Kelvin. So just by seeing what color that star is, we can tell what temperature it has. And from what temperature it has, we can say that how much energy it is spending every second, because it needs to spend energy to maintain that temperature. To be able to spend that much energy requires a proportionate amount of fuel. So we might be able to tell how large that star is. From knowing how large that star is and how much fuel it is burning each day, we know exactly how much fuel it has and how much it's burning. So we can tell how long it's going to live. All by seeing just the color of the light that is coming from the star. This is a brilliance which I guess even Sherlock Holmes would be very proud of. Now it doesn't end there. If I take this light and break it into wavelengths, I can tell whether not just what the star is, what is surrounding the star. It can be possible that there is not one but two stars which are orbiting each other, and they would have a very different color. A red dwarf would be reddish in color. A white dwarf would be of a different color, maybe a blue or whitish. And then there could be planets around it. That could, just like Jupiter has rings or disks around it, a star might have them too. So what is the temperature of disk? You can know that too, because it will leave an imprint in the light that is coming through. We can know whether the star is moving or is stationary. How, you might ask? Well, if it is stationary, this fall would be very sharp because it's not moving. So you are very certain where the fall is. But say it is moving away, just like a train is moving away from you. You might be aware of the Doppler effect. It appears as if its sound is becoming less sharp and more voluminous. And as it comes near to you, it becomes sharper. So this constant phenomena of its sound becoming sharp and not so sharp also happens with light. So a wavelength which would appear like a straight line actually appears broad. How broad it appears can tell you what's going on inside it, how fast it's moving. Again, we are just analyzing the light that's coming from the star. So why astronomy is the oldest science? It has evolved with technology and with the modern age, and it exploits every modern tool that we know of today. But is it enough information already? Or we would like to know more about these heavenly bodies? Yes, we would like to know more, but how? Once we know that a certain type of star has a certain type of characteristics of light, can we actually make a model and in which we can just change the numbers and see what fits the best? So we can be more accurate as to what is happening there. Yes, we can do that. Many astronomers do that. They actually do not look at the night sky, but try to make the night sky on their computers by doing a simulation or a modeling code. What do they do is they make a star, or they make black holes, they make them collide and see what kind of signal it would generate. How would that signal differ if one black hole was more massive than another? How would that signal differ if the other black hole was more massive? What if there was only one black hole and there was something else? Would the signal be equally strong? These are the things they try to answer by playing with the software, creating these models and then playing with the parameters. And when we actually see a signal, we again change this parameter until we find a signal that matches the one which came from sky. And as both of the signal match, we can make a prediction as to what caused that signal to come based on our model. So it's again a very indirect measurement, but it tells us a lot about the world around us. So these are just some of the graphs for this kind of modeling. I would not go into detail, but there are some codes or Python softwares which you could explore. That is PyCBC, which allows you to simulate gravitational waves on your computer and see what kind of waveform it would have. There is Phoebe that lets you simulate stars in your computer and tell how its light would change if there were two stars, if one star was more massive, and so on and so forth. And then there is Gadget 4 that lets you simulate entire galaxies and be able to give you a guesstimate or an estimate as to what the light coming from that galaxy would look like. So again, I have a question for you. Now that you know what skills are used and how wide those skills are, tell me which profession resembles most to an astrophysicist. You again have four options: data scientist, a detective, a professor, or a science communicator. What do you think is the role of an astrophysicist? Again, I would give you 1 minute to answer. You are supposed to use the same link. You might wonder that there's so much data. So it should be similar to a data scientist who is working at Facebook or Google trying to guess what human behavior would be. Because here we are doing that. You can take my Sherlock Holmes analogy and say that it's more of a detective work. But at the same time, you know that most astrophysicists actually are professors in college. And at the same time, hey, the first astrophysicist I met was maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson or someone who came in my local TV channel or on a radio show. So they also communicate science. So what do they do the most? So I have 16 responses till now. Let's see what they are. Okay, so half of you believe that the primary role is of that of a data scientist. 26% of you believe it's a detective, 16% seem to be a professor, and 5% think that they are more of science communicators than actually doing science. Well, until now, I have stressed upon what work you do, which is analyzing data. So yes, they do everything that a data scientist does, but then they go a step ahead and actually try to interpret what the data means in a way that data scientists do not. Because data scientists look for a conclusion, but do not necessarily are interested in explaining why that conclusion happens or why that data is the way it is. So that's where the detective work of a astrophysicist come in. So first he's a data scientist, then he becomes a detective and tries to find out what's happening in its star. Once he has been a detective, now it's time for him to pass on the baton gradually to the next generation of people who would be taking up this profession. Because we have been doing this since time immemorial, from when humans had the ability to think, and we would be continuing to do this in the extreme future. If you look at the surveys as to which jobs are gonna be not there 50 years from now, someone may say that a driver might not exist because cars would be autonomous all in all. The profession of an accountant may not value much because, well, 50 years down the line, it could all be computerized and automated. But an astrophysicist would still remain for a foreseeable future. So it's very important for them to pass on that baton to the next generation who is going to do that. And to do that, they need to come to universities and teach people who are interested that, come on, it's now your turn to lead the way. So once they are a data scientist and have become a detective, they now become a professor. And after being a professor, it's very important for them to actually tell people that how useful it is, because only then they would support this organization or the fund to build a telescope or would care for this kind of activities. So it's extremely important for general public to know what you are doing, why you are doing, and how is it enriching your everyday life. Because there are things that you do for entertainment, like being a movie star might not solve the hunger problem, but it gives us respite from our everyday core. It also makes our jobs a bit more interesting, or so it's quite important for us as a scientist or as an astrophysicist to communicate how your work is helping your everyday life. So an astrophysicist is every 4 of this in a different proportion at different points of time. So now, obviously, you would be wondering, okay, so where do these telescopes come in? Because when I talk about an astrophysicist, there has to be telescopes in this thing. Yes, telescopes do come in, because where do you get this data from that you are analyzing? You need not be smart enough to capture the data if the instrument is very well built, and you might not need to be smart enough to be able to tell data apart, but to create that you need to be a little smart. So now you might know what a telescope looks like, but you might have say that, okay, this is a telescope which I have seen in some homes or in some YouTube videos, or maybe I even have this kind of a telescope, or my local science center has this telescope. I have seen this large telescopes in movies and documentaries. But what about these things? Are they also telescopes? Well, this looks like a dish antenna, Tata Sky or something like that. Is it also a telescope? What is this thing? And what is the background? And well, this is a totally odd thing. I've never seen something like this placed on the ground in so many things. Just like a mobile tower or a communication towers. Well, all 5 of them are telescope, but just as a human eyes can see a visible light, an X-ray detector can see a different kind of light, these telescopes are placed at different places and see a different kind of light. So the one on your top left is actually the giant meter wave radio telescope in Pune. These are a set of 27 dishes which are placed in a wide shape, and they see light which is wavelength of a meter, or a very small wavelength like a microwave or somewhere around that. So why do they see this light? Because this light comes from internals of a star. So actually, instead of seeing the surface of the star, this allows you to see what is happening inside of it. Then what is this telescope? Well, it is an upcoming telescope called JWST, or James Webb Space Telescope. So well, aren't all telescopes space telescope because they look at the space? No. This telescope is actually going to be in the outer space. And why would we want to do that? Well, as you know that if we have an atmosphere, there could be some days clouds, your views could be obstructed by the seasons. If it's a hot day, you might not get a good observation compared to a cold day. On a cold day, the nights are longer, so you can observe for more time. If it's summer, you would be able to observe only for a little time. But what if we could observe 24/7 without having to worry about external factors? Then we put a telescope in space. This is an extremely expensive device. So there are few of them, the Hubble Space Telescope being the previous one and this being the next generation one. Then these telescopes, by now you would be thinking that, oh, they are just fancy toys which most people do not now use. They are just for viewing the night sky and having fun of it. Well, that's not the case either, because many times we are looking at asteroids, comets, or transient objects which professional astronomers miss or are not very interested initially. But once if they have been highlighted by someone amateur or who does it as a hobby, it becomes a very interesting object. So it's like in Ramayana, if you know the epic, they talk about building the bridge Ram Setu, and all the Vanar Sena being interested in putting the large rocks. But there were some squirrels who were actually putting pebbles to plug in the gaps or plug in the holes in the bridge so that the water would not flow in. Similarly, an amateur astronomer too is very, very useful person. Even though he does it as hobby, his work is extremely important, because if you know the dimming of the star Betelgeuse in Orion, which was in news a lot of time ago, was first highlighted by people who are amateurs or doing it at home. So what large or professionals miss, many a times amateur catch them. Then what are these? They don't even look like a telescope. They are not even look like a communication dish or something. They are part of the square kilometer array. It's a telescope which is size of a square kilometer, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and it's being partly built in Australia. And it also has wonderful applications. So what does building so many different types of telescope give us? Well, if you look at a man, he looks like something this. If you take his X-ray, you can know that he has bones. And if you take his MRI, you know he has organs. He has a brain. Similarly, if you take this object, Crab Nebula, you see it in visible light, you know it's beautiful. If you look into X-ray, you would see that there are jets and a disk inside it, which is hidden in visible light, telling that it has a very active core. The gamma ray tells us how energetic that core is. The UV light would tell us whatever is not important, or like whatever has been heated up but is not actively part. It actually tells us that this system expands beyond what is been seen in your visible light. And similarly, infrared and radio would have a different thing. So just like a modern doctor would use every tool at his disposal to figure out what illness you have or what are the characteristics of your body, a modern astrophysicist would use every tool that's visible, every tool that's available to him, and do it. So how do they do it? Like, what's the process of doing it? So they first start by seeing the sky surveys, or these are the surveys which have observed the entire sky or a very large chunk of it. It has created a lot of data, but it has never been analyzed by anyone to know if there is something interesting in that part of sky. Just like Christopher Columbus went around the world to discover things, these are parts of sky which we know exist, we have data for, but no one has opened that data and actually see what there is. So they try to look at this data, then they try to shortlist things that they find out of objects of interest or something peculiar interesting. And they do a basic parameter estimation using modeling techniques and coding. Once they find that, okay, some parameters are peculiar, maybe this star is too bright, maybe it's too heavy than it should be, maybe it shouldn't exist at all. So what do you do next? You write a proposal. What is this proposal for? You write to a telescope telling that, hey, I have found something very interesting in sky based on data. I would like to see it further or evaluate for what it is. And all astronomers do it. And based upon how much merit they find, they give you time, say, okay, you have 5 days, you come here and see. If you cannot come here, we will do it for you and send you the data and you can analyze at ease. So once you have written your proposal, it's approved, only then you get to go to telescope. And as there are lots of astronomers and few telescopes, the time which you actually get to use it is very less. For some of them, it could be only 10 days a year or 5 days a year. And what do they do after coming from telescope? They come with loads of data, sometimes more than 10 times of what they initially had, and they analyze it, make sure what the preliminary data was saying is correct, and then whatever beautiful thing they have found, they share it with every one of us to enjoy and discover. That's how we find those beautiful images. That's how we find these facts that, hey, sun is this large, the mass is this high, the field is this high. So you might think that, no, it's not all glorify. It's a lot of computer time. This job requires self-discipline because you don't actually have a boss who is doing that. And at the same time, to even get a very basic result, it's very time consuming. So it's not all rosy picture. So how do you know I still fit in? How do you know if I can do it? So the best way to do is go to some citizen science initiatives where people are actually have put up this data for people to analyze in a very easy way. So there are the citizen science project called Zooniverse. Well, after a training of just 10 minutes, you can analyze data and find if there are planets around stars which are not in our solar system. And if you find that planet, well, you will get the full credit if you do it using this initiative. Then there is this thing called Gravity Spy. It enables you to find errors or gravitational waves from the data of these LIGO observatories, which you might have missed initially. There is this citizen science project called ASASSN. So if a star suddenly goes supernova or becomes extremely bright for a moment of time, you can identify that and tell it to the astronomers. and you too would have discovered a supernova if you stick to it. And believe me, there have been taxi drivers and truck drivers who have actually learned this skill in citizen science projects and have done it. They have discovered planets and supernovae on their own. And you too can. And well, if you can't, you would know whether you are really interested in this field or whether you would like to continue to it. Well, if you find doing these initiatives interesting and you would like to take a step further, then I would suppose you attend more public lectures, go to a more focused talk which talks about a particular problem or a particular application or a new project that's coming up, and see if you find that interesting. Approach the people who work there and ask them that, hey, can I participate? Hey, can I assist you in some way? Or would you allow me to do an internship, and see whether it fits for you. But all this is in a very everyday aspect. What about your social life? So these are some of the tweets by PhD students across the world. Some of them are scientists. This guy, Seamus Blackley, he has created the gaming console Xbox, as you know. He's also an astrophysicist. So what do they have to tell about this pursuit? The first thing they know is that there is no instant gratification in this field. It's not like the stock market that you make a deal in the morning and you have profit in the evening. It is going to take a long time. So this girl puts it that I'm still doing things people were doing at high school. It feels like I'm a 17-year-old while my friends are getting married and having babies. To some would at the end of the day, you would feel that you have read a lot, but nothing substantial has happened over the day. Like, okay, I just read 5 things. I understood some of it, but what next? There are some days you would be frustrated. So this guy puts it that there were only 2 methods of solving a problem. Either you use math or you give up. And on some days you might feel that, hey, I'm just 23. Why am I doing it so urgently? I have my whole life ahead of me. And the Pikachu puts it, you come in as very calm, and then most of people procrastinate and are in a panic mode. So if you enter this field, this is a kind of social life you are looking for. Many of the important life events which people experience in their 20s may be a little delayed for you, little 3 years, 4 years. And at times you might feel that you are not moving forward in any direction. But that's because you still do it because you love it. And okay, so why do you love it? You might be passionate about it, or little successes that you make in this field would give you joy. You might be fascinated about it, or you might be curious about it. So now we have one more poll. If you can tell what is the main aspect that makes astrophysicist or an astronomer tick, or why are they doing it? You can again poll and tell me which of the 4 do you think is the reason why they continue doing this thing, while they know that they are going to suffer a lot in their social life. What makes them do it still? So I'm getting the responses, and you too would be able to see them changing. So we'll wait for a few minutes, few seconds. Okay, so the counters have stopped moving. So most of you agree that it is whether why they do it is because they're passionate about it, or they're extremely curious to know what's going on around them, or they're able to be curious or excited about things that people pass it off as just a mere coincidence. Well, that's what gets them into the field. What makes them continue to do this field, which is not easy to begin with, is the joy that they get out of it. But hey, I just said that there is no instant gratification in it. You don't get joy every day. But as some of my colleagues used to put it, that imagine those days in your life when you were truly happy. Those could be the days when it was your birthday, it could be when you got married, it could be when you had your first child, where you were truly and purely happy for without any bias. These moments of joy is what a person cherishes in his life, whether they are successful or not in their professional lives. What if you could experience that joy every month, every 3 months, or every 6 months? That feeling is what keeps these people going. When they know they're stuck up for 3 months, 4 months with no way to seem, and suddenly one day they come up with a solution to overtake, that day comes once a blue moon, but the joy it brings them keeps them going. And finally, the fascination. Once you have accomplished a small task, or it leads to a publication, or it leads to an interesting data that you are very eager to share with everyone, the fascination that you have, the joy that you have, would like you to repeat this process again of becoming curious, passionate, then finding little joy in the journey, and finally being again fascinated by what you have obtained. Eat, sleep, repeat. So, just to sum it up, as Kennedy said when they decided to go to moon, that we choose to go to moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard, and it's where our energies and skills are actually challenged, and that we, in our greatest or in the most difficult time, we actually understand what we are. So it's also a process of self-discovery for many of the astrophysicists, which make them keep going despite the odds, despite the low pay, despite the delayed gratification in social life, despite a delayed gratification in public life, and so on. But it's with themselves that they become happy. So that's all for today, guys. I would be happy to take on your questions now.
If you guys have questions, then raise your hand. We'll be picking you up one by one. Or just unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Yeah, so things you can ask me are like, how can I start? What kind of life it is? You can ask why, what did I do? Where am I right now? Anything. You can ask a generic question, a personal question.
Also, you guys can fill the feedback form, which has been provided, the link of which has been provided in the chat box, and where you'll be asked to fill in your email ID, and then you'll be get notified by to get notified about the upcoming events of Project Bhagwati. Do fill that feedback form.
Yes, I see one raised hand in the chat. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
So actually, solid state physics is one of the branch we can kept and going into the astrophysics. So what are the scope after taking solid state physics and go to the in field of astrophysics after taking a solid state?
Yes, absolutely. So if you know, there are bodies like neutron stars, white dwarfs. These have a very peculiar internal structure. Like some of them say that they are pasta shaped, or they are actually superfluids which are made of just neutrons, or some of them are in a super conductive state all the time. The entire star is superconducting at times. So not just solid state, but a condensed matter physics approach, you can actually go and look into what kind of state the star is in. Is it pure plasma? Or you can even explore what the universe was just after the Big Bang or when it was forming. Was it a solid state, liquid state? If it was a plasma state, what kind of plasma it was, what is a quark gluon plasma. So these are the questions that are actually being pursued by people who have interest in solid state and are doing astrophysics. Many of them even ask that why a neutron star has such a large electric field. Where does the strong magnetic fields of 10 to the power 11, 10 to the power 13 Tesla come from? Because no natural magnet we know on planet Earth can create such a huge field. So what are the arrangement of spins at this point? So that's what someone who is into solid state or condensed matter physics would like to use. Did I answer your question, or do you need?
Yes, sir, definitely.
Yes, thank you.
There is a question in chat box. Let me read it.
Okay, so Akash is asking, what is special about L2 point and why the James Webb Telescope will be set at that point? Well, Akash, if you know this L2 point, then first thing is that it will keep the telescope relatively at the same distance from Earth Earth at all times. That means that it will always be in a communication time to us, and it would be easier to maintain the trajectory. But that is true for all the L points. So why do we choose L2 is what you might want to ask next. So if you look at the L2 point, it's a point beyond the moon. So in a way, the Webb telescope gets shielded somewhat by the moon and Earth from the sun and harmful radiation. So there is less noise at this point due to the sun and other solar system bodies compared to other L points. So it having less noise means we get a sharp signal. Does that answer your question, Akash? You can write in the chat yes or no, or if you want further clarification. So I guess I have a question from Dilip. Dilip is asking that he is a BSc third year student and want to know what should I do next to pursue my career as an astrophysicist and work with ISRO. Yes, so that's a very nice question, Dilip. And this might be a little surprising for you because ISRO does not directly employ astrophysicists. The people who work in ISRO mostly deal with satellite technology, rocket technology, and the ways of launching those rockets or creating those satellites. So most of the position in ISRO are actually communication engineers, electrical engineers. Then there are data scientists who would do remote sensing, and those involved in rocket technology. So then where does an astrophysicist come in? There are some places like IUCAA, Physical Research Laboratory. IUCAA is Inter-University Consortium for Astronomy and Astrophysics. It's an institute in Pune. Physical Research Lab is an institute in Ahmedabad. What do these do? They have tie-ups with ISRO. So whenever astrophysicists from these places want to launch a satellite or something like an astrosat, they would contact ISRO. They would make these things in collaboration and then launch it. So if you look at Chandrayaan, even though it's launched by ISRO, but many of the instruments are actually built by PRL Ahmedabad, and some of them might also have been built by IUCAA. So these are the places you might want to work with. Another one is Indian Institute of Astronomy, IIA, that is in Bangalore, that is close to ISRO. They also have close collaborations, and they too operate some satellites and use the astrosat data. And there is one more institute called ARIES. It is in Nainital, and if you have seen some movies like Parmanu of John Abraham, I guess. Yeah, then in that the telescope was shown, which actually belongs to ARIES. So these are the 3-4 major institutes where you can work at. And you would be happy to know that even as a professor in some of the universities, they are now having programs for astronomy and astrophysics. And Pune University is quite ahead in that. There is also Delhi University who does some good work. So you might also want to work with professors at these places. Even I guess nowadays IITs are taking interest, especially IIT Bombay. So you might find some context there as well. But if you want to, you would not be working at ISRO, but you will be working with ISRO, which is, I guess, a bigger honor than to working at ISRO. Because when you are working with ISRO, you are an equal partner in the progress. Thank you, Dilip.
Yes, any more questions? Okay, then let us conclude the session. Uh, Thanks again, Neil Bhai, for conducting this fascinating session. In the beginning, you just showcased the clear distinction between astronomy, astrophysics, and the cosmology, and then the importance of different branches of physics in astronomy and astrophysics, and then in turn, the appearance of nebulas through different electromagnetic radiations, and at the last, the workflow of an astrophysicist, and lot of knowledge to gain. Thanks again for joining us, each one of you, and a special thanks to Neelbai for devoting your special time for this session. And one more thing to share, that if you want to stay connected with us about the upcoming events of Project Bhagwati, then do fill the feedback form which is provided in the chat box. And you can also leave an email on our official email address, that is projectbhagwati@gmail.com. And our next public talk will be on 31st of October, and this will be on error analysis. And it is not a kind of session, but it will be like a workshop where I'm sure that we are going to gain a lot of knowledge. Until then, stay connected, stay happy, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil. Thank you especially. Wonderful. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you to Project Bhagwati for actually inviting me and doing this wonderful, taking up this wonderful initiative of spreading knowledge and making it accessible to people who need it the most.
So, yes, so you are our strategic advisor. We all are together for everybody. Yes, everybody is talking about the talk. I personally enjoyed it so much. I don't know that much about astronomy, but yes, everybody is enjoying the talk. Let them write first.
So thank you, Anil, Ayushi, Komal, Akash, and